Welcome to the Reimagining Management Towards Excellence, an event by the World Management Agility Forum. I want to remind all participants today that this is just a teaser of what is coming up on September 19th to the 21st in Lisbon, Portugal, when the conference will take place. We hope that we will meet you there, learn, maybe co-create management principles, methods, tools of the 21st century. My name is Dr. Annika Steiber. I have passionately studied the evolution of management over the last 3 decades. New concepts such as resilient firms, self-managed organizations, zero distance to users, non-linear management or leadership are concepts that are totally new and are concepts of the 21st century. These new concepts are an important part of the toolbox, the management toolbox of the 21st century, to allow scalability, continuous innovation, agility, and speed in decision-making. Still, a majority of firms are not applying those principles. And if they do, they maybe apply one or few of them. So the companies that do happens to be among the most valued firms on earth. We have the Microsoft, the Google, the Tesla. So you ask yourself, is there a correlation between the adoption of those new management principles and the market valuation of the firm? Today, we're going to discuss reimagining management towards excellence, and I have an amazing panel with experts with me. Together, we will try to provide some clarity in what management excellence means in 2024, and if the adoption of these new management principles will be important for companies around the world or not. So with me, I have Doug Kirkpatrick, famous for his TEDx talks, his book, No Limits Enterprise, and his important work at Morningstar, which is a world-famous case on self-managed organization. We also have Mark Béliczky, a former executive at Carlyle Group, PepsiCo, Citigroup, UBS, and more, who has written Sustainable Performance Excellence. We have Stephenie Gloden. She is a SVP, Head of Enterprise Enablement Center of Excellence at Fidelity Investment, and Birgitte Stjärne, that is well known as an expert and writer on entrepreneurship and who has written the book Principle of Entrepreneurial Capital. And last but not least, we have Alvin Graylin, executive at the largest VR provider in the world, HTC, and the author of Our Next Reality, and how coming decades will play out with AI's evolution and its relationship with human beings. So with that introduction, I would like to kickstart this by going around the table and start with Doug, if you can give a little bit more information about yourself and why you think it's so important to discuss management excellence in 2024.
Well, thank you, Anna. I became passionate about better ways of working, the future of work, organizational self-management, and related topics. As the financial controller, the first financial controller of Morningstar, which grew from zero to become the world's largest tomato processor, with no human bosses, the only boss being the mission statement of the enterprise. And if I were naming this webinar, I would call it Reimagining Management Towards Greatness, because for me, the word greatness is more evocative of lofty and aspirational goals. As my friend Peter Kessenbaum points out, all humans have the capacity for greatness. And the question becomes, how do we create organizations that elevate the greatness of each and every human being? Peter also points out that advances in technology have created such explosive levels of freedom that we as human beings, for the first time in history, have to learn how to manage our own mutation. And we live in a world of excess bureaucracy. It's more than a financial cost, it's a moral cost. We're wasting people's lives performing work that doesn't matter. How do we escape management purgatory and become great?
Hey, thank you. Mark, a little bit by you, and why do you think it's so important to discuss this topic?
Well, thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here today. So I'm CEO, board advisor, and I've held senior operating executive roles in private equity, Fortune 50 companies, and small to medium-sized enterprises. I build and lead growth companies that are truly focused on excellence and which also achieve sustainable competitive advantage. Based on my experience as a practitioner, those that achieve excellence in organizations are the ones that really achieve the highest growth and also achieve distinct competitive advantage. And for that reason, I agree that this is a wonderful format to talk about the focus on excellence. And the reason people don't really often achieve excellence is because it's very hard work. So the key is shooting for excellence and then putting systems and processes in place to sustain excellent performance. Thanks.
Thank you. And Stephenie, you have been doing it in practice, and we will talk more about your experience later. But who are you, and why do you think it's an important topic?
I am Stephenie Gloden, as you introduced, and happy to be here as well. And you're right, I have been doing this for quite some time in practice in large bureaucratic systems that, you know, are very difficult to navigate and invoke change, but change is what is required. As Doug mentioned, there's never going to be a slowdown here to the complexities and what we're facing, you know, as people working within organizations and also as consumers of what these businesses will be producing. And we have to find better ways of working and better ways of managing that high level of complexity, erring on the side of adaptable learning organizations. And so I'm excited to be here to discuss it, just to talk about how you can actually attempt to do this in a highly bureaucratic environment, because I've had the luxury of both startup and large corporations with shifting the way we approach work.
Right. Birgitte, you have been thinking a lot about entrepreneurship that we will also dig into a little bit more. But who are you, and why it's so important?
Thank you, Annika. Nice to be here. Well, my background is that I was working as in an insurance company for 2 decades, developing different projects being in different roles. And I was not really aware that at the time that I was an entrepreneur myself. But later on, when I found it out, I thought it was very, very interesting, because entrepreneurs made things in different ways than other employees did. And the more I will talk more about it later, but the more we come into a complex world with unknown territories to explore, the more we need the type of skills that the entrepreneur have with them from the beginning. So I think it's very important that leaders find a way to lead different personalities, people with different kind of drives, people that contribute in different ways to the companies. And that's my mission now. I'm writing books about it. I'm really exploring it. And I think it's really fascinating how things have turned out.
Okay, Alvin, AI. Can we expect a total change of everything we know about organization leadership? What do you say? Who are you, and why do you think it's important to think AI and management?
Yeah, so this is a big question, and it's something actually I've been thinking about for over 30 years. I studied AI and XR 33 years ago, and have been following this industry and building companies in this industry. I've founded 4 startups. I've worked some of the largest companies like IBM and Intel and HTC, and with senior roles. So I've seen kind of both the fast developing startup culture, and as well as the more stodgy, bureaucratic, larger corporate culture. And I've worked in China and the U.S., so I've seen kind of how things work in different parts of the world as well. Even though I've been in the tech industry and I've been in what's considered a fast-moving part of the global economy, I think what I've seen will be very slow compared to what's coming. What will come in the next 10 years as a result of AI and XR and synthetic biology and other things that are really accelerating our growth and our change of society is going to make essentially we're going to get 100 years of change in the next 10 years. The prior industrial revolutions took about 80 years, 60 years, 40 years to play out. So society had time to adjust. We're going to see this next revolution play out in 5 to 10 years, and our society is not prepared for that pace of change. So it is impetus in terms of how management, leadership, and also policy making and governance at a country level and at corporate level have to really think forward and be ready for these changes and enable a smooth transition. Otherwise, it could go very badly. So that's why I think it's important to talk about this topic, and we can go into more details in the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely, and we will, and it's extremely interesting. So I hear some concepts around the table. I hear complexity, increasing complexity, that will lead to a need for a new leadership. I hear about the human potential to really capture and bring all this potential from human beings. So why don't we go to Doug? You've been working with Morningstar, which was one of the first cases I learned about in the field of innovation management. It has been published for many years now, well known. And you also published a book, No Limits Enterprise. Could you summarize and give some key messages about what you learned that you think that professionals and managers should sort of get from this webinar, and what you learned through your life?
Yes, thank you, Annika. For me, it starts with principle. Morningstar is an extremely principle-centric organization. It started with the origin story, where our visionary founder, Chris Ruffer, brought the core team together in March of 1990. I was part of the core team. It was the admin guy, and then we had 24 total people, mostly technicians. And our founder invited us to meet in a dusty construction trailer at night and talk about principles. And so we did. We sat around in a circle on folding chairs. He handed out a document called the Morningstar Team Principles. Really, they boil down to two things. The first principle is that people should not use force or coercion against other human beings, which is foundational to all law when you think about it. The second principle is people should keep their commitments. If you say you're going to do something, you do it. And so we discussed and debated these principles for the better part of the evening. At the end of the evening, we just kind of looked around the circle at each other and said, we don't have any objections to these principles. They're self-evident. And so we adopted them as pretty much the entire governance of the enterprise. When we exited the trailer, in that moment, we became a self-managed enterprise. And so we had a lot of work to do. In March of 1990, we had to build an entire factory. And so we had thousands of acres of tomatoes coming up out of the ground already in the state of California for hundreds of miles. We had hundreds of construction workers on the job site 24/7, constructing, fabricating, welding. We had to hire hundreds of people to operate the factory, and we had vital equipment arriving on ocean cargo freighters out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean waiting to go through the Panama Canal. But finally, July 16th, 1990, we turned on the factory produced 90 million pounds of industrial tomato concentrate for the world market, pretty much changed the cost structure of the entire industry overnight, and went from zero to $100 million company almost instantly. From there, the company went on to grow. We had another factory and then another factory, and expanded operations up and down the supply chain toward customers across North America, and the supply in terms of farming, transplanting, harvesting, and trucking. And in the process, we became the largest tomato processor in the world, and have never deviated from the two core principles. Don't use force, keep commitments. So these two principles are the most foundational principles of human interaction, we believe. They are to human beings what gravity is to physics. How do we know this? If you imagine a world where everyone abandoned the use of force, we wouldn't need armies or navies or police or locks on our doors. Of course, we know that's not realistic. We understand that's not reality, but that's not the point. The point is, the closer we get to that ideal state, the more space we open up for human happiness, harmony, prosperity, teamwork, and high business performance. Imagine a world where everyone always did what they said they were going to do 100% of the time. What an amazing world that would be to live in. And of course, we understand that's not reality. It's not realistic. But again, that's not the point. The point is, the closer we get to that ideal state, the better off we are as human beings. And businesses, the more space we open up for human happiness, harmony, teamwork, and high business performance. And so that is the path that Morningstar has forged over the last 30 years. My books, my writings, my speaking is all about alerting and making people aware of these possibilities, hence the title, The No Limits Enterprise. It's really asking people to give up power. There is zero command authority. At Morningstar, no one has any authority to tell another person what to do or to unilaterally fire another person. Everything is accomplished through request and response. People do have a professional obligation to respond to requests, of course, but no one can command actions or decisions on the part of other people. And so when you remove command authority, it creates space for what we call natural leadership. The mantle of leadership is earned through trust, respect, and communication. The only metric of leadership is whether or not you have followers. And so people that earn the mantle of leadership through their relationships with others gain currency in the self-managed enterprise. It's a natural leadership. And natural leadership is stronger, better leadership. If you exercise leadership just by telling people what to do, that's not really leadership. That's just telling people what to do. Natural leadership or traditional leadership causes leadership muscles to atrophy. Natural leadership leads to stronger, better leadership throughout the enterprise and greater innovation. So in our world, everyone has the capacity to become a leader. Everyone has the capacity to achieve greatness. And then we achieve accountability through impeccable commitment making and commitment keeping. The great linguist and AI pioneer Fernando Flores did a great job describing the language, the framework, the life cycle of commitment making and commitment keeping. Commitments are the atomic structure of work. It's how work gets done. It's how Morningstar ended up with an org chart that looks like a giant dynamic spider web in constant motion, because there's no up or down or top or bottom. There's just connections between human beings sharing a common purpose with shared meaning. And so looks like a spider web. Spider silk by weight is 5 times stronger than steel. It's extremely resilient, extremely robust. If people leave, it literally does not matter. There are people who reallocate roles and responsibilities instantaneously to make any adjustments needed. And so it's a very powerful organizational model that love to share with the rest of the world.
Interesting. Okay, so you mentioned a number of concepts here that I heard from other very successful companies as well. The importance of accountability, not forcing anything to people. It could be, you know, related to decentralization, providing much more decision power lower down in the organization, and so on. I would like to go over to Birgitte. You have been thinking a lot about entrepreneurship. How would you say that? Why is entrepreneurship why is it important? Might be obvious, but why are organizations not good at capturing the entrepreneurship capital of the organization?
Well, I think that what I was talking about is it's originating for engagement among the employees, and I have met a lot of companies now. They are looking for talents because they understand that a lot of things are happening out there, and they are asking for people who are like, they are thinking outside the box, and they will embrace change, and they will be resilient, and they will think long term, and they will look at failures as not as like personal failures, but as learning opportunities, etc. That's what companies are talking about today. But on the other hand, when I compare these wishes for talents with all the people I met in companies for 15 years, people who have been running transformative projects within companies, the entrepreneurs who normally work within the hidden or under the radar, they have like 80-90% of these characteristics which companies are asking for today, because companies understand they need a certain kind of talent to navigate in the new. But the thing is, they can't even take care of what they've already got. They can't take care of their entrepreneurs that are already in the companies. And now they want to recruit even more people with the same personality, the same kind of characteristics. But unfortunately, if they don't find a way to identify, to develop them and to keep them, they will not contribute with anything more, the new talents, because big companies are not really made for that kind of independence that is needed when you work with transformative change. So that was why me and my colleagues we started to discuss this. Why are like 90% or more of all transformative projects failing in big companies? And we started to analyze it, and we started to make a model of it, what we found. And then we saw that the companies are normally consisting of two parallel systems. One we call the hierarchical system, or the stable system. Within a stable system is a hierarchy, and that's what's visible to others from the outside. And this short-term focus structure with very clear mandates and decision levels, etc., they are focusing on short-term growth, efficiency, and profitability. And that's like the mission of the company, and it's been that like that. And then you have the invisible part, which is like, or less visible. It's the decentralized system, what we call the changes system. And there you can find, then you have flat structure. You have like more like networking and decision making, because this is about finding totally new solutions and trying to secure the company in the future. So the perspective is different, and the way of working is different. But unfortunately, this has not really been accepted and identified like by top management in many companies. It's more like things just happen. But in reality, which we show we made this 4C model for entrepreneurial capital just to illustrate how it could look in a company with this stable system and the change system. And if you want to have a transformative process in a company, you need to be able to work in both these systems in parallel.
Which is very hard.
Very hard.
Very
but
hard
necessary.
because it's a safety to stay in the stable system.
Yeah.
But you will die if you don't use the dynamic, the changing system of your firm, I guess. I love your framework very, very much, actually. I think it's very valuable. Stephenie, you have been doing this in practice. I have learned that I think even it became a famous case of what you did. Can you explain a little bit what happened, why you where the ideas came from, what you did, and what it resulted in?
Yes, of course. So I want to acknowledge what Birgitte is saying in terms of, before I get into the case, of acknowledging the challenge of creating that system of high innovation and creativity and growth that is going to be suppressed by the bureaucratic system that over and over again leaders will fall back on because it's the comfortable place to be and the comfortable place to operate. And so where my story comes in and where it continues to come in as I do this same type of approach within Fidelity is I was working with Apollo Education Group, who was a parent company of University of Phoenix, at the time one of the largest for-profit private universities. And we were facing down any number of challenges happening. High scrutiny, regulatory scrutiny, changes in compliance expectations, aging technology, aging practices, things that were not going to propel us into the digital future that we needed to be focused on, challenging student experiences, and overall just a complete slowdown of any innovation or creative changes in the way we operated and our overall strategic vision, which was we were slowly dying, to be frank, was what we were facing. And so I knew that what I managed, which was a very large portion of the organization focused on our front-end experience and technology stack servicing the students, that we had to do things differently. There was no way for us not to do things differently. So if the approach that I decided to take was I'm very much an academic and then also a practical applier of those academics. So I went to town doing research and studying, and it was really a trifecta of what I chose to bring in as sort of frameworks to aid us. One was doing a lot of startup thinking with lean startup principles so that we could start to approach our business cases and the way we thought about evidence-based thinking differently, faster, thinking about our challenges, whether they be internal or customer facing, as those of a startup, because they had high complexity, had all of the makings of things where we needed to figure out a mechanism to create ideas that would be sustainable and be valuable. The second piece of this was I definitely invested heavily in agile ways of working so that if we can get this different approach to thinking about our services, our products, and more of a startup mindset, how do we get through that feedback and learning loop as fast as possible? Well, we need to move faster. So we need to be able to invoke a different approach to how we were working through these problems. And then lastly is where Doug and I connected up, was I found that even though I was creating this really great environment of success and where I was really wanting a system where we focused a lot on our employees being able to make decisions and being creative, they didn't do it. They were afraid to do it. And I was faced with a reality that I was kind of shocked. Like, just because I say, yes, you can do it, doesn't mean they had the comfort level of doing it. And I'm like, I've got to figure something else out. And so this is where I started searching for solutions and centered on self-management practices. And the story goes, I read my Harvard Business Review article that highlighted Doug's work around, I think the article at the time was called First Let's Fire All the Managers, which is, provoking in and of itself. But it was a framework that the two things that he talked about, that was like the tail end of my trifecta here, which was, no force, don't use force. That's not going to result in an environment where people have trust and feel confident about the decisions they're making if they feel like there's going to be some sort of punitive thing happen. The second thing was honor commitments. So much of the time inside of a large organization, and a big incumbent or bureaucratic organization, we don't honor these commitments, or we don't do the work of really fleshing out what the opportunity is and what it's going to take, so that we're all comfortable about honoring those commitments. And you spend so much of your time in waste of trying to chase down those that you're dependent on. And so those two things were really a huge change for us. And what I will say is, the way that I was able to do this in a large bureaucratic organization is I also invoked something that I call a culture bubble. So I put a wrapper around this large organization, and as the leader, I faced out to any of that bureaucratic type of work going on that I knew I was going to have to deal with, so that I could keep the culture bubble wrapped around this organization, so that we could learn how to do things differently and be better. And that took a lot of horsepower on my part as a leader. It was a complete shift, because then I had invoked all of this horsepower of creativity amongst the employees to run, because we had some systems here that were shifted and changed. We had high trust. We had a lot of evidence-based decisions we were making, but I had high trust that this was the path forward. And we had a lot of fun, to be frank. This was a fun environment to work. And what got the eye of our executives, after I put the bubble up, I'm like, nobody's allowed in to lift under the hood. So Birgitte, your point of like the hidden, this was me. I was hiding. But then we couldn't hide any longer when the results started coming out. The actual outcomes started coming out about our performance. We had the highest employee engagement scores in the entire corporation, like out 10 basis points higher than any other organization within the company. And we were able to accelerate a lot of the digital transformation work that was required for us to get a foundational setting for the future. So it definitely requires a lot of leadership. It requires a lot of trust in yourself, but there are the frameworks that you can put together and put into practice. But in a big incumbent organization that's not a startup, you still are dealing with money, capital, resources, and older ways of thinking. So you have to figure out how to put that culture bubble up.
So that is extremely interesting. This system in the system that you created with the culture bubble, and what you created was more or less a new system in the existing system,
Yes.
and you protected that system. Was that system sort of spread outside later? So was
Later.
that almost like a pilot? So
It is, and that's the way to think about it. So even the thinking of like even the lean startup thinking of, what is your evidence-based hypothesis to provide value? What was my evidence-based hypothesis to provide a different system? And what were the experiments I was going to be running in order to pressure test what that system was or could be? And then once I had enough information, and then once, the evidence came back, even without me going out and waving my banner, then everyone wanted to start to learn. What did you do differently? How can we spread this across into other areas? And it actually resulted in the university making a huge investment in a startup. As well. So
I hear sort of a very similar message from all of you. Let's go to Mark. So far we heard a lot about the importance of decentralization and give decision power to the people. We heard self-management. We heard about the importance of entrepreneurship or intrapreneurship, and maybe to protect that new culture that we're trying to build, the new system we're building. And part of that, we also heard that, Doug, you mentioned that leadership has to be natural. And the one that will be followed might be the leader rather than someone pointing out the leadership or the leaders. Mark, do you want to sort of explore a little bit around that, the sort of what you see the trends in leadership? I also would love to hear you and your thoughts about the incentive system, because when we talk about people and we want all this capability from the people, and they get this fixed salary, will we also see a potential shifting incentive system so we can motivate all those people even more to contribute? How do you see the future regarding leadership incentive system or overall?
Yeah, thank you. There's been a large and significant shift in leadership, moving away from the post-heroic era of leadership where it was command control to more of a coaching, supporting style of leadership where leaders are confident yet humble. And this is new, and it hasn't been taught in business schools, but it's something that a number of us have embraced, and it's being discussed at a lot of different universities and practice. So I think that's the biggest change, is leaders who are humble and vulnerable and authentic and empathetic. I think Doug talks a lot about that, where you truly wish to engage your teams. And I think that's the biggest change. And creating an environment where you probably speak less and listen more. If there's a skill set that I've learned to work on and continue to work on, which is being a much better listener as a leader, being prepared with greater questions than answers, and then walking into a meeting and not having answers, but sharing a debate and the discussion about how we can leverage the voices of all team members that are in place. So I think that's, from a leadership point of view, that's some of the biggest changes that are occurring, and you'll hear more and more people doing that and embracing that. With regard to pay, compensation, incentives, the biggest form of incentive for most team members will be an intrinsic motivation, which is, what am I getting out of my work? And am I being listened to? Do I have a voice? Can I make a difference in my organization? And I think that's key. But something that you're also seeing, which is a huge shift, is the area of team member potential wealth creation through ownership. And just last week, Blackstone announced that all future acquisitions, all team members will receive stock, not just a wage, but they will receive equity in the business. This is already happening at KKR, and it has been happening, and they were really leading the forefront in this category. So that's been happening as well. So from a compensation point of view, and the job has to be rewarding, but also wealth opportunity and wealth creation will be passed to beyond just shareholders, or they become the shareholders, but they also get a chance to participate and think like owners, think like entrepreneurs, to where Birgitte has been talking about that. That will drive a lot of the behavior. So those are some of the key dynamics that are happening in the business, and they're here to stay. They're not just going away. Again, when Blackstone announces this, and I had a colleague that says, oh, well, they're testing it. I said, no, they're not testing it. They just don't announce that they may be doing some of these. They are doing it. So they've recognized the value of the contribution that can play, because they have the insights. One of my favorite stories in becoming a new CEO in organizations, that I ask people about their processes or systems, and they say, oh yeah, well, we do it this way. And my next follow-up question is, oh, do you have a better way of doing that? And they said, absolutely. I said, oh, well, why aren't you doing that? Well, because we're not allowed, or no one really encouraged us to do that. So inherently, team members have a great insights as to how to do processes and systems in a better fashion and in a better way, but they're never empowered, typically aren't empowered or engaged. So we've heard a lot of people talk today about engagement. The number is rather terrible globally. What's the global engagement? It's less than 20%. So 80% of team members in organizations across the globe are disengaged in their businesses. What happens when you drive in the engagement function of a business and move it from 20% to 80%? And the impact that'll have on business? That requires great leadership. The other key factor is that with the Gallup research, that 70% of managers are okay or poor. So if we expect managers to create followers, it's going to be a long slog because 70% are okay or poor, which is challenging. And 70% engagement is directly attributable to leaders. So we have a leadership problem globally. So as leaders in organizations, our first and foremost piece of work will be, are our leaders being effective? Do our people have a voice? And how do we make this happen to drive excellent performance of organization? It starts with people.
Fantastic. And those things, we have been discussing this for years, right? And still we just see a few companies that actually go all out. Morningstar is one example. I'm thinking about the Chinese hire that state that all employees need to become entrepreneurs, have decentralized the whole organization into 4,000 more or less companies within the group. I'm thinking about Google that I studied in 2010, that already then had this extremely focus on people and to get all this capability from the human beings in the organization together with technology. And with that, I want to go over to Alvin, because I'm living in Silicon Valley. I meet these tech companies and they are fast. They have adopted a number of those principles, of if not all of them, and they are super fast usually in scanning and scouting and understanding what will happen. I mean, Google started to invest in AI in 2009, right? But today they feel that they cannot keep up the pace because it's just going faster and faster and faster, as you say. So what is happening in your perspective? What will happen with the world? What will happen with organization and management? You're muted. Sorry.
Okay. So I agree with a lot of what Mark and Annika, what you guys are saying, because I think the key thing we need to start thinking about is the pace of change. Management, I think there's kind of been a dogma of how to practice it for a very long time, but a lot of the fundamental assumptions behind management, behind how companies are structured, are going to be disrupted. And those changes are going to need to be adapted by management to make sure that companies progress naturally in a effective way going forward. So we really need to think forward. We need to think about what the next generation of workers and employees, think. In fact, yesterday I spent the last 2-3 days at the University of Washington. So I did the commencement speech at the New York, and so I had a lot of time to spend with these young people. And it's interesting to hear their perspective in terms of how they want to be managed, how companies should be structured, and how much empowerment they should have. And there's also a real fear of job displacement from AI, particularly a lot of people I was speaking to were in the technology space, and AI is probably the first casualties will be the technical workers, the cognitive workers, right? So there is a real issue there. Now, I think you can flip it around and say, hey, this technology will enable also massive productivity gains. And for the right people who are using it properly, you can get 2 to 10x increase in productivity easily. And that could be a real benefit to both the business owners and corporations, and also for the individuals who leverage this technology. I think McKinsey just came out with a new report about 2 weeks ago that said they were able to get their consultants to get a 30 or 40% increase in productivity. But what's more important was that there was a wholesale 2 standard deviations of change in terms of quality of content that they were creating. Right. And then, McKinsey hires are already the top in the world in a lot of areas. For them to have a 2 standard deviation change in quality is very impressive when for people who are teams who used AI to help them versus ones who didn't, right? So the other thing I think that a major change that will be happening is virtualization of the workforce. It started to happen already with COVID and remote work, where we start having people not working in the office. But increasingly so, we're going to have a much more global workforce, and talent can be sourced anywhere in the world. And in the next few years, when virtual and immersive technology become more pervasive, virtual offices, virtual collaboration spaces will be even more natural than they are today, where people will actually come to work in a virtual space from anywhere in the world, and you'll be judged by your talents, not to where you were born, and not necessarily by what degree you have. So I think that changes a lot of how we recruit and how we evaluate talent. It'll much more be based on productivity you can actually create. Another thing that I think will happen is that we will actually start to incorporate AI agents as part of the coworkers. And they will be assistants initially, but later on, they actually may start to carry on and do functionality that are independent by themselves. And that's not that far away. It sounds like science fiction, but the trends of what we're seeing today will make that very viable. We had 10-person billion-dollar companies with something like a Instagram when they were acquired by Facebook. But I think in the next few years, we're going to have 1 to 2 people billion-dollar companies. So companies don't have to be 100,000 people to be major companies. And how do you manage that when those 1 or 2 people essentially are managing AI agents that are helping them do a lot of the work? That's going to change how management is perceived and carried out. I think one of the things that we need to think about is, as corporate leaders, as we increase productivity, do you lay off your workforce? I would recommend, rather than thinking about how do you save costs by laying off your workforce, is how do you leverage that productivity by giving them more free time, actually. Moving from a 5-day work week to a 4-day work week to a 3-day work week, keeping more of your workforce, but then allowing their productivity to help your companies continue to increase your profitability and leveraging the corporate knowledge you have in your staff. Because I think that's going to be one of the biggest assets you have is you're going to get a lot of AIs that can help you produce, but somebody has to still direct that AI to be doing the right thing. It's like immediately getting 1,000 new college grads to be your help your productivity, but if you don't have managers to guide them, they may be doing the wrong things. Another thing that we need to think a little bit about, and probably more from the policymaker perspective, is really thinking about how to create UBS safety nets. So universal basic income, universal basic services like medical and education and health, other things that will make sure that as more people get displaced, and they will displace, and there will be significant portions of people being displaced, how that will allow us to still maintain stability in the society. And displacement may not actually be a bad thing. A lot of people think of, oh, I've lost my job is a bad thing. I actually think that if we do have a proper safety net, losing your job may be the best thing that's ever happened to you, because it will free your time up to then go and pursue things that you really care about. As Mark mentioned, 80% of people are not engaged, or they're not enjoying their work. If they can be allowed to go and find whatever that passion they have and spend time on that, whether it's art or music or medicine or it's deep research, all of those, you can go and spend time to learn those skills and pursue those things. And I think that's a trend that is coming, and we need to think about how we enable reskilling of the workforce to allow that to happen in a smooth way, where it does not create a crisis in the society. So I really see AI as more of our patron and our benefactor long term, versus just a tool or versus a threat. And you look at the Renaissance. Why did the Renaissance happen? Is because you had these benefactors who went. First you had peaceful society, and then you had benefactors who went and found talented people, and they were they took care of all of their needs, except for allowing them to go and invent things and to paint things and to discover things. And you had this flourishing of art and science. And I think we will have that same type of a situation where AI and robotics and other things are going to help be our benefactors, so that we free up the time of people, so that they're not just doing grunt work, they're actually going and maximizing their potential. So enough for me for now.
So I would just like to direct one question about user focus. One thing that I learned from the company I work with is that AI and digital technology also have been made, this user centricity, taking that to a whole new dimension. We talk about this zero distance between the company and the user. Anyone that want to, Alvin, do you want to say something about how you see that?
Yeah, I think, once we start having these devices on us that are always monitoring or what we say, what we see, it will hear and see everything we will. And it will understand us better than we understand ourselves. And that information can be used, if you're a commerce provider, to provide the exact right level of product and services to that user. I don't know if I like the term user, because user usually means that, it's like drug dealers call their customers users. Right? We really should be thinking about how do we make these future, and I don't even like the word consumers. Consumer just means you're just consuming something. You're not actually making anything out of it. I think really citizens of this new society, I would like that to be the way. And having AI be a worker for you, so that it is not working on the behalf of an advertiser to use that information about you to then manipulate you to do something, to buy something. Right? It should be on your behalf, taking the information it knows about you to then provide the best solution that you need for to solve your problems. Whether I need to buy something for my daily use, or I need to learn something, or I need to help my children with some information. Right? That's what technology should be able to do, and it will be doing it if we properly regulate and manage how this technology and how that data is being utilized.
Okay, so we have 3 more minutes left, and I would like to create a list of management principles for the 21st century that you think that every manager ideally would have on sort of their screen, that those are the principles that we should try to navigate towards, that is then representing excellence. Who want to start? And you cannot repeat the same thing. You need to add to the list. So,
sure. I'll start. This is Mark. So I look at 3 E's: empowerment, engagement, and enlightenment. So those people who create a very people-centric organization will have those 3 key components central to what they're doing. Almost to Doug's comment about principles, that will drive a lot of high performance in organizations.
Okay, so people-centric organization, including empowerment,
engagement, and enlightenment. Which means investing in your people.
Yep. Okay. Next principle to the list. What should we add?
I think it's very important to for leaders to understand that they can't be any more top down. It should, visions and direction, that's on the top, but all the work and the inspiration and the control should be from the bottom.
Okay, so no more top down, rather bottom up.
Yeah.
Okay, and the next principle to the list.
I can go. I think it's important for leaders to have a lot of courage. So in order to do all of these things, we have to have courage to step out of what we know. And the second, I don't know how you would create this as a principle, but we have to agree that we don't have the answers. So we have to de-incentivize the culture that wants answers to the culture that wants to learn what those answers are, because we don't even know the questions that we need to ask yet.
So accept uncertainty here to stay, and live with it.
Don't incentivize that I know the answers.
Yeah, so have a management model that works with high uncertainty,
Yes.
because that is here to stay. Okay, what should we add to we have empowerment, we have people-centric organization, no more top-down, rather bottom-up. Courage, leader need to be very bold and show courage now to be able to change. Accept that we are living in a world with uncertainty, high uncertainty. So learn how to manage that. Anything else?
Polarity management. Leaders need to figure out how to manage polarities, balancing courage. Thanks, Stephenie, for that. The inner will with ethics, the caring, kindness, compassion, nurturing, support, encouragement, and empathy that leaders need to express to other people. Also balancing current state reality, the constraints, the terrain upon which they're operating, with a vision of a desired future state into which they can lead people through invitation.
Love it. Alvin, last one. You're muted now, Alvin. So.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I would say the key is, for me, is curiosity and compassion. Curiosity in the sense of you really need to start getting your teams to be curious, because in a world where answers are going to be increasingly cheap, questions are going to be increasingly valuable, and really having them keep learning, keep questioning things, and keep reskilling and making themselves better. And compassion in the sense of, when you're making decisions, make sure that you take care of the people, not just your people, but also your customers and society as a whole, and how your decisions are going to affect them long term. And long term is really the key. Is when you think long term, a lot of these natural things will happen. In the past, we're so focused on productivity and getting everybody to do all the work. I actually think that productivity will happen naturally with all of these new technology that we're going to have at our hands. And the key that will separate us will be how we treat our people.
Okay, so back to people again. We started with people, we end with people. And I want to say thank you, and thank you to all participants. We got great comments as well in the chat from a number of people here about the comfortable place, about if stocks, equities actually is driving this loyalty and engagement, and a number of other things. So thank you for engagement, and thank you for being with us today. We hope to see you in Lisbon on September 19th to 21st. So let's continue later in September. Thank you.